The Gift of Maggie, writer O. Henry. $1.87, that was all. She had put it aside 1 cent, then another, and then another, in her careful buying of meat and other food. Della counted it 3 times, $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. And there was nothing to do but fall on bed and cry. So Della did it. With the lady of the home slowly growing quieter, we can look at the home, furnished room at a cost of $8 a week. That is little more to say about it. In the hall below, there was a letter box, too small to hold a letter. There is an electric bell, but it could not make a sound. Also, there was a name beside the door, Mr. James Dillingham Young. When the name was placed there, Mr. James Dillingham Young was being paid $30 a week. Now he was being paid only $20 a week, and the name seemed too long and important. It should perhaps have been Mr. James D. Young, but when Mr. James Dillingham Young entered the furnished rooms, his name became very short indeed. Mr. James Dillingham Young put her arms and warmly about him and called him Jim. You have already met her. She is Della. Della finished her crying and cleaned the marks of it from her face. She stood by the window and looked with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a gift. She had to put aside much as she could for months with this result. $20 a week is not enough. Everything had cost more than she had expected. It's always happened like that. So $1.87 to buy a gift for him, her Jim. She had had many happy hours planning something nice for him, something nearly good enough, something almost worth the honor of belonging to Jim. This was looking glass between the window and room. Perhaps you should have seen this kind of looking glass is placed in $4 furnished rooms. It was very narrow. A person could only see a little himself at a time. However, if he was thin and moved very quickly, he might be able to get a good view of himself. Della, being quite thin, had mastered this art. Suddenly she turned on the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face has lost its color. Quickly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its complete length. The James Dillingham Youngs were very proud of two things which they owned. One thing was Jim's gold watch. It had once belonged to his father, and long ago it had belonged to his father's father. The other thing was Della's hair. If a queen had lived in the rooms near theirs, Della would have washed and dried her hair where the queen could see it. Della knew her hair was more beautiful than the queen's jewels and gifts. If a king had lived in the same house with all his riches, Jim could have looked at his watch every time they met. Jim knew that no king had anything so valuable. So now Della himself and his beautiful hair fell about her, shining like a falling stream of brown water. It reached below her knee. It almost made itself into a dress for her. And then she put it on her head again, nervously and quickly. Once she stopped for a moment, stood little while a tear of two ran down her face. She put her old brown coat. She put on her old brown hat, and with bright light still in her eyes, she moved quickly out of the door and down the street. Where she stopped, the sign said, Miss Softrani, hair articles of all kind. Up to the second floor Della ran, stopped to get her breath. Mr. Softrani, large, too white, cold-eyed, looked at her and said, Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Mr. Softrani. Take your hat off and let me look at it. Down fell the brown waterfall. $20, said Mr. Softrani, lifting the hair to feel its weight. Give it to me, quick, said Della. Oh, the next 2 hours seemed to fly. She was going one shop to another to find a gift for Jim. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any shape of the shops. She had looked in every shop of the city. It was a gold watch chain, very simple made. Its value was in its rich and pure material. Because it was so plain and simple, you knew that it would be very valuable. All good things are like this. It was good enough for the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew Jim must have it. It was like him. Quietness and value. Jim and the chain had quietness and value. She paid $20 for it and she hurried home with the chain and 87 cents. With the chain on his watch, Jim could look at his watch and learn the time anywhere he might be. Though the watch is so fine, it had never had a fine chain. He sometimes took it out and looked at it only when no one could see him do it. When Della arrived home, her mind quieted a little. She began to think more reasonably. She started to try to cover the sad marks of what she had done. Love and large-hearted givings, when added together, can leave deep marks. It was never easy to cover these marks, dear friends, never easy. Within 40 minutes, her head looked like a little better. With her short hair, she looked wonderfully like a schoolboy. She stood at the looking glass for a long time. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he looks at me a second time, he will say I'll look like a girl who sings and dances for money. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7, Jim's dinner was ready for him. Jim was never late. Della had the watch chain in her hand and sat near the door where he always entered. Then she heard his steps in the hall and her face lost color for a moment. She often said little prayers quietly about simple everyday things. Now she said, please God, make him think I am still pretty. The door opened, Jim stepped in. He looked very thin and was not smiling. Poor fellow. He was only 22. With a family to take care of, he needed a new coat and he had nothing to cover his cold hands. Jim stopped inside the door. He was quiet as a hunting dog when it is near a bird. His eyes looked strangely at Della, and there was an expression in them she could not understand. It filled her with fear. It was not anger, not surprise, not anything. She had been ready for it. She simply looked at her at strange expression in her face. Della went to him. Jim dear, she cried, don't look at me like that. I had my hair cut off and sold it. I could not live through the Christmas without giving you a gift. My hair will grow again. You won't care, will you? My hair grows very fast. It's Christmas, Jim. Let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I have got for you. You have cut off your hair? Asked Jim slowly. He seemed to labor to understand for what happened. He seemed not to feel sure he knew. Cut it off and sold it, said Della. Don't you like me now? I am me, Jim. I am the same without my hair. Jim looked around the room. You say your hair is gone, he said. You don't look for it, said Della. It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone. It's the night before Christmas, boy. Be good to me, because I have sold it for you. Maybe the hairs of my head could be counted. She said, but no one could ever count my love for you, my dear. Shall we eat dinner, Jim? Jim put his arms around Della. For 10 seconds, let us look in another direction. $8 a week and $1 million a year. How different are they? Someone may give you an answer, but it will be wrong. The Maggie brought valuable gifts, but it was not among them. The meaning will be explained soon. From inside the coat, Jim looked something tied in paper. He threw it upon the table. I want you to understand me, dear. Nothing like A haircut could make me love you any less. But if you open that, you may know what I felt when I came in. White fingers pulled up the paper, and then a cry of joy, and then a change to tears. For the lay of the combs, the comb that Della always had been in a shop window and loved for long. Beautiful comb with jewelry, perfect for her beautiful hair. She had known the cost too much for her to buy them. She had looked at them without any list of who owned them. Now, as they were hers, but the hair was gone. She held it to the heart, and last she was able to hook up and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then she jumped up and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not seen yet his beautiful gift. She held it out to him in her open hand. The gold seemed shine softly as if her own warmth and love is here. "Isn't it perfect, Jim? I hunted all over the town to find it. You'll have to look at your watch 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how beautiful they look together." Jim sat down and smiled. "Della," said he, "let's put our Christmas gifts away and keep them for a while. They are too nice to use now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy the comb, and now I think we should have our dinner." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought the gifts to the newborn Christmas child. They were first to give Christmas gifts. Being wise, their gifts were double less wise ones. And here I have told you the story of two children who were not wise. Each sold the most valuable thing he owned in order to buy gift for the other. But let me speak a word of wise of these days, of all who give gifts, of those who are the most wise, of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are the most wise. Everywhere they are the wise ones. They are.